Hello, this lecture is about how to write your evaluation paper. So I'm going to be going over this document that is with the place that you will submit your paper. So if you open it, it looks like this. So these are the directions on how to submit your paper. This lecture will take about 15 minutes. You're more than welcome to listen to parts of it or all of it to help you do well on your paper. So this is the most difficult paper in this class because almost the entire paper is critical thinking. If you have not participated a lot in your data collection analysis, if you did not come to any of the help sessions, this paper is much more difficult to write. If you chose not to come to any of the classes where I was helping with data, please do not text me or ask me questions the day before your paper is due. If you chose not to come to your scheduled class time for help, it is inappropriate to ask me to help you outside of that class time. So this paper that you submit will have 3 sections like everything. Your first paper, the first submission, the first thing you attach is your paper with a title page APA format. You will have in-text citations based on references that you're going to use in this paper. Your second attachment will be all your appendices, which I'll talk about in a second. And your third attachment will be a reference list. Once you have all 3 items attached in Blackboard, you will hit Submit. This paper is rather large, depending on what you attach, and it's going to take longer than 5 seconds to upload. So please do not wait until the last minute that it's due to submit it. It's also possible that you may lose documents if you're using a Mac. Mac does not do well with large documents in my experiences, so please make sure you save everything right before you submit it. So let's talk about the appendices that go into the paper. I'm going to talk about 3 items, but these are not the only items that may or may not be an appendix or an attachment to your paper. As you're writing your paper, you may decide to include something else. So what I'm going to discuss are the data collection forms. If you look in Blackboard, it says that Step 1 and Step 3 will go into your share drive, and Step 2, which is a Word document, will go into this paper. That is true if your entire group worked together on the data and you all use the same data forms together. If that's true, then Step 1 and 3 go into the share drive, and Step 2 is the only thing that goes into your paper. However, a lot of groups broke down into individuals working by themselves, or a group of 6 broke down into a group of 2 and 4. If you broke away from your entire large group, and I'm not talking about the elementary school, I'm talking about the middle schools. If your group broke up into smaller sections, then you will include Step 1, Step 2, and Step 3 as appendices. Because you broke up, your Step 1 and Step 3 might look different than the other people in your group. It should not, but it might. For the elementary schools, if you broke up into groups of 3, which was your presentation group, then I would not expect Step 1 and Step 3 in your paper. However, if you were a group of 3 and you split up and did this individually, then I would expect Step 1, Step 2, and Step 3 to be an appendix. If this is not clear, please let me know. So here we have the sections of your paper. I am highly recommending that you use these subtitles. This will help you organize your paper and cover what you're supposed to cover. So the first section is called the Evaluation Overview, and this is going to be 1 to 3 pages. Remember, these are loose recommendations. I'm only looking at the total number of pages at the end, but this is truly what I think is going to happen in this section. 1 is relatively short, 3 is relatively long. You could easily do this in 1.5 pages. So just keep that in mind. The first part of this section, you're going to explain the purpose of evaluation in general, using correct terminology in a way that demonstrates your depth of understanding. If you think about some prior papers, when you did the needs assessment, you talked about the correct way to do a needs assessment. When you did your planning paper, you talked about the correct way to do the planning. In this paper, you're not talking about the correct way to do it, but you're actually going to explain the purpose of evaluation and why it is conducted in program planning. Then you will describe the purpose of our evaluation. And our purpose is slightly different because there's many reasons why evaluation occurs. We did not evaluate all of those pieces. So you're going to explain the purpose of our evaluation, using correct terminology in a way that demonstrates what we did. And then there's this other piece where I'm asking you to list a variety of items that we evaluate. It doesn't have to be 20 items, but it needs to be more than just the data that we're using for chi-square. This might be put into a chart with 2 columns. One column says, this is what we evaluated, and this is why we did it. This is what we evaluated, this is why we did it. So that could possibly be a chart. It could also be bulleted. It would be least effective to put this into a paragraph, this one piece. If you do it, that's fine, but that is the most difficult way to understand something like this. So that's the first part. The next part is data collection. And in data collection, all you are doing is describing what we did. If you think about your needs assessment paper, there was a section that said, describe how you did your needs assessment. In the planning, there was a section called describe how your group planned. This is describe how the data were collected. And I'm only looking at the data we're using for chi-square. So again, you're going to describe what we did. Some of the groups are slightly different because the different schools requested different strategies, and you're going to use correct terminology and depth to show your depth of understanding. Basically, you're just repeating what we did. Now comes the really hard part of the paper, and this is analyzing your data. The overall pages for this section are 6 to 12. These are not including your appendices. And what you're going to be doing in this section is looking at your chi-square data and analyzing it and trying to make meaning of what the numbers mean. I will be looking for correct terminology. If you say we collected qualitative data and you then describe quantitative, you're going to lose points. If you say this is formative data and it's summative, you will lose points. So I'm looking to see that you know how to use the terminology. You are then going to have to explain what your data actually mean. If you've been coming to the health classes, I've shown you how to look for trends. What you will not do is say, this class for question 1 got this score. This class for question 1 got this score. This class for section 1 got this score. That's in a chart, and I can read. So you're not reporting on every single cell. What you're reporting on are the trends that you see in your data. You might also report on something odd. So for example, all the classes did really well on one question, but 2 classes did poorly. You might then report on that, and you're going to explain why that happened. So you're going to be discussing in this section whether or not you were successful at the health fair based on the chi-square data. There are things that could be wrong. There are things that might be right. But what you're doing is you are discussing your success based on chi-square. There are also other ways to measure your success, and you need to include at least one other way that you could measure your success at the health fair. So for example, your chi-square could show that you're not successful at all, but there are other data that you could use to show that maybe you were successful. you have to have at least one other way besides chi-square to look at the data. There are lots of ways to do that. If you think about the planning process and what goes into planning, that should help you come up with another way to look at whether or not you were successful. This next section says to consider using charts to show the data. The one chart that might be in your paper is the chart that shows all the chi-square data in one chart. That can also just be in your appendices, because I will open your appendices and look at them while I'm reading your paper. However, some people find ways to use bar graphs or circle graphs to make the data make more sense. If you can see how that would help you tell your story, then feel free to include bar graphs or circle graphs. However, do not just put them in there because you think I need them. I only want you to put them in there if it helps you tell a story. If it doesn't help you tell your story, then do not put them in there. So there you are explaining what the data mean. And in this section right here, you're going to explain, based on the data, were you successful or were you not successful? Were you partially successful and partially not successful? And you are going to be explaining why or why not based on your data. So if you say we were successful, then I'm expecting you to refer back to the data that you've just explained and explain how that data shows your success. So up here, you might say, chi-squares for this class showed that this class did more poorly than all the other classes. But in looking at the data we have, here are a couple problems that may have occurred. That's this section. This section would be, when you look at the data for all the classes, we seem to have been very successful in this question, not so successful in this question, and some reasons why that may have occurred are. Again, I'm looking for data to support it. So if you say the reason we were not successful is because there were too many children in the group, I would expect you to at least count how many children were in that group. All of this comes to 5 to 10 pages. I can't imagine you doing this under 5 pages. You might, but I can't imagine it. Then the last 1 to 2 pages are you critiquing the way we collected the data. So you've already explained how we collected the data above in one different section. You've explained what your data mean. And now, looking at all of that, is there a way that we could have changed the data collection that would have made it better? In doing this, I would expect at least one citation. So if you say, well, the way we collected data is perfect, I would expect you to be able to cite someone that says that besides you. And if you have a recommendation on how the data collection could change, I would expect a citation on that. This easily could be done in 1 page. So the total 6 to 12 pages. So now this part, recommendations and conclusions from data. What are the conclusions? So what I'm expecting you to do in this section is to take the data, reflect on the entire planning process, the entire semester, and make some conclusions about your group, about your presentations, about data collection. Did your group do planning correctly? If your group did planning correctly, do you feel that that affected the data? Did your group not plan correctly? And do you feel like the data shows that? Are there issues that you just didn't see when you were creating the chart that's a logic model with your objectives and your test questions? Did you see something? For example, I was working with a group on the attitude question, and we realized that the attitude question was not written well. They said out loud to me that they didn't really review it because I wrote the question, assuming that I would never make a mistake, and I made a mistake on their question. So that might be something that if you don't show any attitude change, that group might actually say, well, we didn't review the question, the teacher wrote the question in a way that was confusing and no one caught it, and that may have affected our attitude question. So these are overall recommendations on what this data say about your group, your planning, data collection, whatever it means. And so that brings us to the end of the paper. And you can see here, this is 11 to 25 pages, not counting the title page, not counting appendices, not counting reference list. If you have, and it says, if you have 10 pages and you think it's really strong, don't try to make it 11 or more. These are guidelines. You can see there's a wide variation in what it is because one group might have a lot to say in one certain section and another group might not have that much to say. So the variation in pages is there because each group will be relooking at different data and each group will have different things to say. So that variation is there based on that information. Do not try to get to 25 pages is a goal. Your goal should try to be as close to 11 pages as possible and make sure that you cover all the information. But I will stop reading at 25. So what that means is your title page is page 1. When I get to page 26 of your paper, if there's 4 more pages left, I will not read them and you will get zeros on that part of the paper. So make sure you don't go over. Okay, this explains the second document that you'll submit. And this second document will be part of your appendices. And in the appendices, this is something else you need to add. You need to have the chart with NCHEC standards. So you're going to have the data collection sheets, only step 2 or all 3 steps depending on how you did this. You're going to have a chart with NCHEC standards on it. And I'll come back to that. And you're going to include your peer and self-evaluations here. Your peer and self-evaluations are submitted 2 places. They're submitted by themselves and they're submitted in your paper, so make sure you do that. So the NCHEC standards are listed in our syllabus, and when you do this, you are not grading yourself, you're not grading me, you're grading the class. So in this class, we are supposed to cover all 7 NCHEC standards. What you're going to do is score the class. So one of the standards is be a resource person for health material. So you would say, okay, in this class, I feel that, we did above average on that in the class, so I'll give this a B. And then there's a place where you need to explain why you're giving it a B. And I actually read these to see how we did in your impression of going over all the NCHEC standards. And if there's a consistency in something that we did well, I try to repeat it. And if there's a consistency in something we didn't cover so well, I try to fix it. So that's a really important part of this second document. And then your third document is the reference list. So that concludes this presentation. This is what I'm expecting in your paper. Please feel free to look at this. If you have questions and you've been to the help sessions, feel free to text me. If you chose not to come to class or you came 45 or 60 minutes late to class on the days that we had help sessions, please do not feel free to text me with questions because that's very disrespectful of our class time and of my time. So I hope this helps you write a really strong paper. Please make sure you stick to these points. These are the points that are in the scoring rubric, and this is exactly how your paper will be graded. Again, good luck, and I look forward to reading your papers.